Good afternoon. Welcome to the Planning Commission on Wednesday, February 21st, 2024 at noon. We have some guests, so we will, first we'll establish a quorum, which we have. And second, we'll administer an oath for anyone that wishes to speak today. Will you just hold up your hand if you plan to speak? Are you guys going to speak today or no? Okay. Yes. Just hold up your hand and say, do you promise that anything you say today is truthful and accurate? Thank you. Okay, disposition of the January 25th, 2024 minutes.
Do you want a motion?
Yeah,
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. A second?
I second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved. Cases, we don't have any cases today. So we'll move on to communications. And Director Riggs, do you want to take over the Elliott Street rezoning request?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a request, and we discussed this a little bit at the last Planning Commission meeting, where we have an area down south of Stimson Avenue, and we're going to be looking at an overlay district in this area for business development. The applicant is asking to change the existing zoning, from a B3 and R3, if you don't mind, I'm going to bring this up here, to an all B3 zone. Sorry, that's actually B zone. We also have this has actually got the auditor site wasn't working this morning with the lot lines, so this is 4 lots here that Mr. DeLuca owns and would like to make a request to rezone.
And then, it's okay. So, David, when we talked the last time, we talked about a recommendation from your perspective to extend the rezoning to not only include these 4 parcels that are on the applicant request, but then also to add that parking area to the south and just take that entire stretch and turn this from a current R3 to a proposed B1. Is that correct?
To a B zone, and so let's discuss that just a little bit. One of the things I'd like to see here is a buffer between the residential and the M zones. Typically, in planning, you want to have that buffer between those 2 types of uses. So I think it would be appropriate to look at maybe rezoning not just these 4 lots, but possibly the next lot down, which is owned by Athens Mold Machine. I think the lot below that may also be Athens Mold Machine. There are actually 3 different owners here, all the way down to Mill Street. There's multiple lots, but 3 different owners down there. And the suggestion would be to look at maybe rezoning that whole area, all those lots, for a buffer zone between the residential and the M zone. We looked at a B1. I know that the applicant is looking at a B3, but we think a B1 zone might be a better zone because there's 2 on his property. There's 2 existing structures. If you made it a B1 zone, they would still be legal conforming. If you made it a B3 zone, then those would become legal non-conforming uses because there's residential on the first floor, right. Which is not allowed in a B3 zone. The uses are almost all the same. The setbacks are almost all the same. The biggest difference between a B1 and a B3 zone, in this location, I think the biggest difference is that you can have a drive-through with a B3 and you can't with a B1. Everything else is very similar. a B1, a B3 would also be a good buffer between the residential and the M zones. So either one would be okay. We would actually prefer the B1 because of that legal nonconforming issue.
I have a question. So you talk about buffer, and I guess I'm not sure I understand the nuances of that. So you're saying because manufacturing exists to the east of it, that potentially if that whole block, as you were suggesting the possibility of rezoning, so the lower portion of it that is resident R3 right now could potentially become manufacturing if not rezone to the B1? Or I'm not sure I understand your term buffer and what the advantage of
a
it.
buffer zoning would be two uses in different zones that are not as compatible. So if you have, a lot of times, as an example, a lot of times you will see an R2 buffer zone between a business and an R1. That buffer makes it so that you don't have single-family residential pushed right up against the more a business zone. It actually makes it better for the residents if you have some kind of a buffer in between that. This works the same way, where you've got this heavy manufacturing use that could occur in the M zone, and it would right now it's adjacent to, it's right up against a residential, and it would be nice to have some buffer non-residential zoning there between the M zone and the residential zones.
I think
that's what I'm considering a buffer.
The difference, I think he's worried this becomes all residential and you have residential versus M versus if this is all business, you have manufacturing, business, residential.
Right,
So
okay.
the fear would be that this all becomes apartments and now you're right against a manufacturing zone.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's the
Yeah.
buffer, business between manufacturing and residential.
So I guess the other question would be, and I raised it last commission meeting, is that we have the structure point recommendations, and is that we move forward. So this is communication today, and so it needs to, structure point needs to go eventually to city council, correct? And so would the recommendation for this, and what we're trying to do is do structure point and this request in concert
They're
with
so
each
close
other.
together, I think it would be appropriate to have them look at it, yeah.
I would contend that we have an owner requesting the change now. I don't know that we're ready to proceed with the structure point zoning overlay, because I think that that's something that requires quite a bit more study from our new planner as well as us. I think we do need to check the report that they did to ensure that we're not doing something that actually would run counter to that before we would approve this. But I don't know that they need to both go to city council at the same time.
At the same time, yeah,
Correct,
and I
'cause
didn't mean to imply that
Yeah,
either, because
we-
I don't want to rush our process
Correct.
with structure point,
Right.
correct?
We
Yeah,
do wanna
I'd agree,
compare the
I'd
two.
agree. So then my question is, so there are two things in my mind that come through, and one would be, the structure point, part of their presentation was talking about higher density residences, and so, I would want to feel confident if we were moving forward with the recommendation on this piece of property, that what we were still doing is being able to look at, providing housing, because housing, affordable housing in the community is at a real premium at this point, and so it's a big concern. And so there's that other area that's, adjacent to it. I hear what you're saying about buffers, so I think I understand that. Okay. My other question was the timeline that you had shared with us, and I'm glad you're here, Mr. DeLuca, today, because we would want to know, our thoughts were that Mr. Riggs had heard that you were wanting to look towards moving forward with this by summertime.
Preferably, yes.
Okay. So we've got some time to,
Sure.
in process-wise.
Right.
I don't want to slow you down, but on the other hand, we need to
Yeah,
do,
if not earlier, obviously, but
we need to do due
what
diligence
he was
on,
telling me between planning and council, that type of stuff, that's kind of what we're looking
Right.
at time-wise.
okay.
Go backward plan.
Are you acceptable to B1 instead of a B3?
I mean, the reason I think B3 is more appropriate.
It's gotta go to the-
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
you've got to go to the podium.
Sorry, yeah.
So we can,
I apologize, that's mine.
The reason I think that the B3 makes more sense is the first parking lot, which I don't know if you got, did I got the big map up there?
Yep.
Is zone B3 already. And then this way, if all three, all of them were tied in together, the same zoning, if you wanted to do, not necessarily me, maybe not, but if you wanted to do like a whole project there, it's all the same zoning, which there is an empty lot there now, and that would give you a different, like, for example, if somebody's, I don't know, wanted to put a drive-through in, like a Rally's or something like that, potential is there for it. Since, Stimson's kind of doesn't have a lot of that, but Stimson's also building up at this point, the location of that spot is in close proximity to, the other places around here, the Kentucky Fried Chicken and Sonic. I just feel, like I said, I just feel that would be more appropriate for where Stimson is going at this time. Because it's no longer going to be just a side road in this town, it's going to be a main entry point.
So a quick clarification for legal nonconforming versus not legal nonconforming, and how we approach those circumstances, and we just want to not allow, or we don't want to create a situation where it actually ended up being a problem for you. And so, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but in situations where we have a B1 zone, a B2 or a B3 zone, where businesses are not allowed on the first floor, residences are not allowed on the first floor in a B zone, if they cease to be, and there's an existing residence in them, so a great example is along Richland Avenue. If they cease to have a residence in them, that is to say in a rental situation, that they don't apply for a rental permit, that kicks in the zoning requirement, so that you no longer can have a residence there. And so,
Right, when I talked to David, he also, mentioned to me that at the same time we could apply for a variance for that.
that's possible. I mean, it's just,
So I guess it all has to be in coordination with each other, because obviously,
and you never know what the Board of Zoning Appeals would do. I mean, that's, you can guarantee you can do it if it's a B1.
right, I guess we would need an answer from them, on that. I mean, it makes sense since things are already there, I guess.
I mean, it would be future users and future boards of zoning appeals to know whether or not they would grant a variance or not based upon the time that it happened. Because I think right now, those occupied structures are probably rented, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. And so if they stopped being rented, am I correct?
I don't want to
Yeah,
change that. I'm just
yeah.
like, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't want you to trap yourself into a situation
Right,
where you
right.
couldn't use it.
Right.
And the Board of Zoning Appeals said, no, we're not granting a variance because we don't want first floor residential. And all of a sudden, you were in a situation that you got a usable residence that you're stuck because zoning doesn't allow for it, whereas B1 zoning would.
Right, so I guess.
What's more important, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all is. But yeah, so I guess it's something that, we'd have to deal with,
Yeah.
both issues to do it that way.
And then one other question for David. The Mold Machine property to the south, and this is a question and a statement. My statement is, there's other owners involved, right? So we know there's one owner involved with Mold Machine in the parking area. But then there's several other owners involved in the area to the south of that. While there's one owner involved and it's an existing parking lot that probably is going to stay that way for a while, I don't see that being that big of a problem of going ahead and rolling that into the zoning change request. I would be hesitant to pick it up and unilaterally change the zoning south of that parking lot, or make the recommendation to change it when there's these several other owners that are currently in an R3 zone down there. And I think we should probably do it incrementally as opposed to trying to rezone it all at once. But I do agree, if we pick this up, we probably need to make contact with the owners of Mold Machine. And then if we do recommend a change in zoning on the parcels that Mr. DeLuca has requested, if we want to pull those in, that we do it all at once, with those, but I don't know that we should go all the way down to Mill at this time. That's my feeling on the matter.
I have a question. Director Riggs, will the owners, the contiguous owners, then they will be notified that this case would be coming. When it gets scheduled for a case, they'd be notified about it.
So that happens at the city council level. So once we
Got it.
get through here with the recommendation, you go to city council, they
And then they
do
do the
a public
public hearing.
notification,
Got
yes.
it.
So they
Okay.
will get notified, yeah.
Okay,
We're just making a recommendation to city council for action,
got it.
And so next meeting could potentially be a case, is that correct?
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I think for it to be a case, we would want to know what you would want to do in terms of B1 or B3 and the variances and all that stuff, right? Because we, at that point, we would be voting on a recommendation of the B1 or the B3.
Yes.
So is that something that can happen by next, if we make it a case, could we have the information back on what would be best?
As far as,
What you'd like to do?
what I'd like to do, or.
In terms of talking to, is that enough time to
Yeah,
talk to
if-
zoning and?
I guess I do got a question then, is it if the one empty lot, which there's nothing there right now, which I don't know, I just think it'd be kind of strange, but if, obviously the houses, if they're a B1, and that's not changing anything. If the empty lot was a B3, the same as the driveway, where it's a parking lot that's already existing, could it work that way?
Leave the B3 alone and then just move the
No, there's
the
no
three
B1.
R3s to a B1?
No, the three R3s, there's an empty lot there, and there's two with houses on it.
Oh,
The empty
okay.
lot, a B3, and the other
saying
two,
this
a
one, three in
B1.
the
The
middle.
houses that already
So
exist,
this is
B1. They're not gonna
B-
change as far
The
as.
B3 right now.
But if that if that stays, if those, the ones below it stay at B1, but those change to B3, then you could have a drive-through. You could have a Rally's next door to a residence, or a B1 with
Yeah,
the
so
residence
then,
on the
I mean,
bottom.
You have that all
Yeah.
over town.
Yep.
And you have- you
It doesn't
have
mean-
businesses
it doesn't-
below Residents uptown, you have businesses, you know.
It exists, doesn't mean we want to encourage it, I don't think,
Well,
but that's me. So, yeah,
You know, B3 is less restrictive zoning than B1. I mean, that's really the bottom line. It's just that nuance about that first floor residential that could create a situation that traps itself. And so, you know, for the future, and, you know, I applaud you for, you know, looking at future uses and the fact that this is an area that the city's goal is to intensify the development in and, you know, position yourself basically to, you know, be able to put businesses in this area, should we be successful with some of our economic development goals. You know, I think it's good. I just don't want to create conditions where we're trapping you or a future owner if, you know, those residences go unoccupied and then we're not able to issue like a rental permit, for instance, because it's a
Right.
non-conforming. But,
Oh, like I said, the ones with the structures already on are B1.
like, bounce it back and forth between that, yeah, we can look at
I mean,
that.
that's fine, and then, yeah, like I said,
That's what you were
you just
saying.
have the one
Yeah.
zone, which, you know, I mean, the plan is that we'd like to build our, you know, vending warehouse there, but.
Yep, I understand. And the vending warehouse can work in either.
Yes, but, you know, like I said, since it's an empty lot, whatever, just wanna make sure
Okay.
we have options available, for whatever reason, you know, things happen.
You know, how do you want to go about it? Do you want to just have us go back and study a little bit more and then bring the case forward and next week and when we're ready and you know, take a vote on it?
Do you have a recommendation, Director Riggs?
The only concern that Mr. Stone addressed was was our concern about legal nonconforming use. B1 or B3 it would be okay for a buffer zone for us, which is what we were more looking towards, some kind of a buffer there. So either one would be okay. I don't have a preference except that you have those legal nonconforming uses.
So, Director Riggs, I think what Mr. DeLuca is asking is, could it go B3, B1, B3, B1?
We just talked about that, and we think that would be okay as well. yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we should also talk to Athens Welding Machine because I do want to bring that forward and just say, hey, you have a preference.
Yep.
So that we understand what they want to do. If we're going to rezone them without them asking for it, we
Yep.
should talk to them.
I will do that.
So do you think we're comfortable to do a case for the next meeting, or should we wait?
Yeah, let's go ahead and plan for a case, and then if something comes up, we'll let you know.
Yep.
How
Okay.
does that sound?
So that way we can move forward.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. we want to welcome, I apologize, I should have done this earlier. We have a new city planner, Megan Jennings. So welcome, Megan.
Thank you very much.
Next, on communications is the tobacco zoning and marijuana dispensary zoning. Director Riggs will.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have been looking at making some changes to our zoning code to help control tobacco and marijuana dispensaries. And so we have some information. I got that earlier. I don't know if it's in the package or not.
I gave it to him.
It is? Okay.
Or do you mean the
Yes.
the list?
The list. Regarding the number of tobacco, licensed tobacco businesses that we have currently in the city, I think there's a total of 33, which is less than I had expected, that currently have a tobacco license. I'm not sure how we'd want to move forward with this. What we were thinking about was maybe having a certain number of dispensaries or tobacco sales locations per zone. So you have a certain number in a B1 zone, a certain number in a B3 zone. And I don't think they're permitted in maybe an R3 zone. You may have a limit to how many you have in an R3 zone. And so if you look at the list, you can see, and I don't have it in front of me, I apologize. Thank you, I do. You can see here where we've got addresses associated with each one of these 33 businesses, Court Street, State Street, Stimson, Columbus. So we'd like to, as we move forward in this, we'd like to bring you a recommendation on how many licenses we would want in each one of the zones that we have, the R3, B1, B2, B2D, and B3 zones. If that's acceptable to the board.
And I have a question on process. I shared the minutes with you from the December meeting of the council where they tabled the ordinance that was to move forward on that.
Yeah.
And the minutes reflect that Councilmember Swank was going to bring it back to the committee.
So a point of order
okay.
on this. I believe what was tabled was legislation to have the city license tobacco retailers.
Correct.
So we're
True.
talking about two different things here. Right. These are retailers that are already licensed by the State of Ohio Department of Commerce. And so what we're talking about here is zoning and having a certain quantity per zone as opposed to an unlimited number per zone. And using the tools that we have in zoning to manage proliferation of one particular type of establishment versus another type in order to maintain a balanced business portfolio is kind of what we're thinking. The reason that I wanted to have this brought up today is because we know that come September there will start to be recreational marijuana dispensary licenses issued. And cities are allowed to completely prohibit marijuana dispensaries under Ohio law right now. The medical marijuana law, and it will stay the same for the recreational marijuana, and that we could completely prohibit by ordinance them. We can also manage them by zoning. The city of Logan, there was just a news story the other day that they're looking at banning recreational dispensaries citywide. So they're just not going to have them in Logan. I don't think that that's the direction that Athens wants to go. But what our concern is that marijuana dispensaries will be a fairly lucrative business, and the impact of that fairly lucrative business on the ability to pay rent in particularly our central business district. They're just if there's not a limit, our fear is that more and more storefronts will flip to be a dispensary, right? Because, and it'll drive up rents for coffee houses and restaurants and other things. And so while I don't think we want to zone them out, I do think that a limit per zone is appropriate in order to kind of keep a balanced business portfolio. Why it relates to tobacco is, we believe that several of these stores will do both, basically. And so the question that's before us is, if we are going to put a limit on marijuana retailers in a particular zone, recreational marijuana retailers in a particular zone, should we do that? Should we do a combination marijuana and tobacco retailer as a limit, or should we do a limit on tobacco retailers per zone, a limit on marijuana retailers per zone, as a zoning effort, and make that recommendation to council to adopt it into the zoning recommendations? And so that's what I wanted to bring up for discussion, to see what the commission thought. And then obviously there's more work to do on quantities and numbers and locations and that sort of thing.
And I absolutely agree that it's important to be proactive about it, and I like this approach of looking at it systematically, objectively, what is where, what businesses are where. And I guess my only point in bringing up the minutes was, and this is my ignorance on the process, do we need to have a request from City Council, or we can move forward with this now? And if we can, absolutely, I would agree that we should move forward now.
There's, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but if I remember, there are 3 different ways that zoning can be changed. Number 1 is that a person requests it, and then it goes through Planning Commission for recommendation, goes to council. Number 2 is if council requests it, and then for the Planning Commission to look at it, Planning Commission looks at it, gives a recommendation, and then if council wants to vote against that recommendation, it has to be a supermajority, or modify it, basically. And then the third way would be for council just change it on their own, but there's nothing that prohibits Planning Commission from putting a recommendation outside of a request.
Okay.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So we could proceed?
It's kind of what my thought is. I think we need to, as a member of the Planning Commission in 2024.
Should we have another communication next time when Mayor Patterson is back?
Yeah,
Just moving it to a case?
and he and I have talked about it. I don't think we're going to be ready for a case on this yet.
Okay.
It's more along the lines of talking about it and getting it out in the public to start to generate interest. Anytime you pass regulations, which, a limit will be that. I mean, there are interested parties that, and I don't know that we want to be too, this is just my opinion. I don't think we need to be too restrictive. Look at the existing number of establishments in a particular area, determine what a reasonable number more would be, and then that would be what I would think would be a reasonable limit in a particular zone. And so it allows for a couple more establishments to get licenses, and then you have that zoning, and then it would be capped out. And then if somebody leaves, then somebody else can move in there. I've traveled to some cities where, every storefront that you go by sells recreational marijuana, and I don't think we want that certainly not in our central business district. And so, but we're not saying we're not going to allow for it at all either, because we know there's going to be a demand for that. So what is reasonable, and how can we get ahead of it as a city in preparation for the September rollout of dispensary licenses?
Okay. It sounds like we'll move it to the next meeting to continue to discuss this. All right. Okay, great.
That's good. And just one further question, maybe you mentioned it, you did talk about a map with the locations superimposed on the zoning?
Yes, that's my intent, yes.
Great. Okay, so maybe, is that possible for the next meeting, or not? Or maybe?
Maybe.
Okay, thanks.
You certainly could probably do a hand-drawn one.
I could do a hand-drawn one.
I think
Yeah,
the
okay.
challenge would be a real professional-looking
Yeah.
product might be a little
Yeah.
hard to do. We're still working through some of our GIS tools.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we have a lot of time, right?
Yeah, we do have a lot of time. Obviously, if we look at what we wouldn't want to do is get into a situation, what I think, we wouldn't want to do is get into a situation where maybe we're moving on a process, but we haven't established a number yet. And then people start applying for these licenses, and then we end up, more people have licenses or have applied for, potentially paid for licenses than are allowed in a particular area. And then, we run into a problem, or, we put a limit on a number of places, and that limit is lower than the existing locations, and then when will it proliferate? I don't know. There's 33 smoke shops, basically, or places that sell cigarettes and tobacco products in Athens. Is this something that we want to approach?
Okay. All right, thank you. Moving on, 2024 Planning Commission goals. I don't know who wants to take this.
Chris, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. We've looked at a set of goals that were identified through the last minutes, and one of them being studying the tobacco vendor locations as a goal for this coming year. The second one, and there are 6 of them that have been identified, the second one was design and recommend a zoning overlay for Stimson area. And in combination, as we've mentioned earlier in this meeting, with Structure Point. The third goal that we talked about was staying apprised of the new community authority for the ridges with timely review of the plans and requests, and then working to collaborate where possible to make the proposed development plans successful. Fourth one, integrating the new city planner. And you could have been introduced, but we'll do more, we promise, our new city planner, Megan Jennings, and introducing her to the Planning Commission and the Athens community. So welcome again. Our fifth goal was described as strengthening the relationship between the city government and Ohio University as it relates to planning for the Athens community. And then the sixth one being our standard operating procedure of reviewing developments that come before the commission and with the Planning Commission guidelines to encourage growth and development. So I didn't know, I had one question in my mind because the tobacco, the first goal, we had said identifying, determining appropriate distribution of retail outlets in the business, and would it involve and manufacturing? Do we want to say that, or all zones, or zones in the city, or?
I think it's all zones, not just B zones, because they're certainly allowed in M zones. So I think it's in all zones rather than business zones.
Okay.
And I would argue that we probably should add marijuana dispensary in addition to tobacco.
Okay, so study tobacco vendor and marijuana dispensary locations,
Yep.
adding those 2 words, okay. Dispensary, and then we're deleting the words retail outlets and we're deleting business, and we had in manufacturing and in a parentheses, so in the zones in the city.
Or in all zones.
Does all zones, does that imply R1 that we would allow it?
I don't think it implies that we would allow it, but I think we would. Well,
I suppose what it could do is if you put in all zones, I'm just reluctant because it might give the impression that we were going to allow it in residential, but there are other restrictions that would prohibit it being in a residential zone anyway.
The state may have additional restrictions. We wouldn't have any unless we wanted to add those into our own zoning code. Because right now you can have business use in an R3. You can have for local sales, so you could have tobacco in an R3. As far as our code's concerned, there may be regulations at the state level that prohibits that, but in our code it doesn't.
David, and this is splitting hairs here, but I know that you can have a home business in an R1, like what we would traditionally think of would be I don't know, an independent accountant, right? He goes and he does accounting in his house. Could just sell tobacco out of an R1 under that home business concept.
Our code doesn't prohibit that. Like I said, there may be state regulations that do.
I think we should look at
So we should say all,
I think so.
I think, probably so. Okay, and all zones. Do we need to add any kind of clause in that says in conjunction with state regulations or not? Or we don't need to worry about it because we can pass something that's more restrictive, but we can't pass something that's less?
I would say that that's implied that if they if they have to comply with state regulations as well.
So it's understood, okay.
Zoning is one of the few tools that cities have in a lot of cases, when you can't otherwise prohibit things that, have been preempted by the state, but you can govern by zoning if you do appropriate zoning process.
Okay. Would you like to make a comment? Or
Yeah. No, you're good. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Robert Delich. I live in Morris Avenue here in the city, just here representing myself. About the tobacco licensing, City Council was also talking about ideas, other things they might do that I think are not zoning, but just to make sure you're aware of those, is a 500-foot buffer from schools. As of right now, we have a smoke shop that's within 500 feet of the middle school. That building is within 500 feet, about half the smoke shop is. So it wouldn't necessarily be okay to do that if there were new rules like that. So that's, I think, City Council that would do that, but they can't do anything like that until we have the licensing in place. And that's what was attempted at the end of last year and failed. But that's just another piece of this to keep in mind. So 500 feet, not just, many other cities have done this, not just from schools, but also from other places where kids frequent, playgrounds, community center, things, parks, things like that.
I would counter that I don't think we need to have a licensing process locally in place because there is a state licensing process, and we can make reference to the state licenses and say if we're going to zone and restrict by zoning and a radius, we could say an entity that holds a state tobacco retail license without having our own. I think the intent with the local license, and I don't mean to speak for council, but I think their intent at the time was to be able to generate a revenue stream to do enforcement on under 21 sales locally. And that was what was tabled ultimately and not brought back forward because of the extra burden on businesses. They're already applying for a state license. It's a way to identify an entity that sells tobacco. And if we want to regulate through zoning, we can just reference the state licenses as opposed to local ones.
And I think the next step is what you're talking about, the zoning, would be sort of dependent on the licensing though.
Right, and you have a list. There's 33 places in the city of Athens that have a state license, so.
Anyway, I just want to make sure that was out there.
Yep.
And I definitely support this. I think it's a good idea. It should be done. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Nisley, for going over the Planning Commission goals. Moving on to reports. Director Riggs,
Just a couple things. We have and I haven't even had a chance to look at it yet, but we have received another petition for a zoning request, which you probably will see as a communication at the next Planning Commission meeting. This is a request to zone a B2 to a business, or a R2 to a business zone. So you'll see that coming up. I also I don't know if I had discussed this last meeting or not. I do have, and I'm working on some potential changes to the city's zoning code, which includes container structures, container homes, container storage units, Conestoga huts, small, tiny homes, and some other of the new things that are coming up. We want to refresh and update our zoning code to meet the new ideas that are coming out. And if you don't do that, you end up backtracking. So we want to make sure we're being ahead of the ball, coming to you with some ideas on what we can do for the new ideas that are coming out now. So look for that.
I have a question. When you're talking about reviewing the containers, are you also thinking of reviewing the accessory structures or not?
We can, if you tell me what you want to do, and we'll do it.
There's been more and more discussion of that.
Accessory
Different
structures, yeah.
Affordable Housing Commission, the age-friendly
Yeah.
community, they're talking about accessory structures as a way of looking at housing. affordable
Yeah, there's
housing.
a bigger issue with housing that we probably want to address at some point, but that's a bigger discussion than we can have today.
I actually, in a second, a response to you, Chris, on this, and David saying it's a bigger issue. I think that we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I think that if there are small bites of the apple that we can take to help allow for densification and allow for more housing in the city, even if we don't do a comprehensive, I think maybe we would want to do that, and certainly with Director Riggs and Megan, the planner, being on board, I think that they can probably give us some pretty good recommendations on how to make some modifications as opposed to a comprehensive rewrite.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't suggesting a
Okay,
comprehensive.
okay, I'm sorry.
Believe me, no.
Yeah.
Just that one item, because I did come across in looking at the zoning code, the accessory structure listing, so.
And Rob Delich, Morris Avenue here in the city. So there was some discussion this past year in this body about the bigger picture issues for housing. And Director Stone talked about some of those ideas he had for that, which I love, like all that stuff. We should fix those kind of things. I do agree with what he just said, though, about trying to bite off some small pieces might be good. I'm trying to get some folks together to start looking at the code, and people that have a better understanding than I do about what could be done, what other cities have done, and then look at our code to see what bigger issues could be addressed. And then try and maybe bring that to this body, City Council, Housing Commission, Affordable Housing Commission, and start trying to get something done about some of those issues. But I certainly think in the meantime, trying to work through some of these small bites would be good. I agree with all that. I think anything we can do to move the meter in the right direction would be good. Minneapolis, for example, just passed, not just within 5 years or so, passed comprehensive changes to zoning that loosened restrictions and allowed densification in R1 zones even, and they've had a 12% uptick in housing built. So 12% of their housing stock has increased, 12% as a result of that in those 5 years. So there's a lot I think we can do and should do, especially for small lots. That's a big hurdle here, is we have a lot of small lots and not much is allowed to happen on those. So at any rate, that's something I'd like to see on your agenda, but for this year. But I think it's going to come forward enough that we can discuss that further, and I don't know if it needs to be on your agenda, but it's something I'd like to see added to your agenda, is to look at housing and how our zoning code could be adjusted to enable small-scale developers in particular, but also even bigger scale potentially. Thanks.
Perhaps we could add that to our goals for 2024.
Do we want to make a seventh one, or?
Yeah, seventh one, review of,
Or
review of code to promote more affordable housing, basically.
Do we want to include densification or no?
I think so. I mean, I think that's kind of part and parcel.
Do you want that in that language? So it would be review code to promote more, more housing.
Affordable
Affordable housing.
Densification.
I think a good example,
Maybe including densification.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rob references like bulk controls on small lots. Our bulk controls on our small lots that say, this setback from the front, from the side, from the rear, you got a small lot to begin with, you really end up not being very usable. That would be an example, I think, of one of the things to look at.
I think this is the last one. That'd be good.
Oh, so put
six,
this,
I think
make
that's
that 6, the review the code to promote, I see what you're saying, more affordable housing.
Yeah, I think-
To make that number 6, and then and keep the last one, the general one, as number 7 then, yeah. Okay, thanks.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
So, caveat here, I think the word affordable, maybe not necessary in here. The Housing Commission, the Affordable Housing Commission is focused on that. Honestly, the way things work is it's really hard to build affordable housing. Some accessory dwelling units and things could be affordable
Housing.
housing right from the bat.
Yeah.
It's really hard to build things that are affordable because it's so expensive now for one thing, but, so if you just build housing.
Yep.
I've
Yep.
dropped the word affordable to say housing, make housing easier. If you build a nice house that's expensive, somebody moves into it, they vacate another house, that becomes affordable housing potentially. So
Yeah.
there's a trickle-down effect. That's not a good word to use in economics, right, because it has bad connotations in the US, but that's sort of what's happening there. You build nice houses, people move into those, and they vacate houses that are now more affordable for other people. So it's a trickle-down effect.
Sure.
Thank you for
So
the,
just housing, I think, is
Yeah,
one.
housing is good.
thank you for the clarification. That's great.
Yeah, there was something else I was gonna say, but that was the main thing I wanted to say.
No, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. There's nothing else on that. City Planner Jennings.
I don't have much to report out on right now, but I have been reading and catching up on a lot of the materials that the City of Athens has been working on. I'm excited to partner with the Director Riggs here and work on some of the zoning stuff. I'm not sure if you all have any questions for me right now, or
If you could just give a little bit of your background, like the Reader's Digest version for the viewing audience at home.
okay. So I graduated from Athens High School, and I also attended Ohio University for my undergraduate degree. I have been in the planning field for 10 years now, and got my master's degree at Ball State University in planning. I'm excited to be back here in Athens, and it feels really nice to come back home.
Planner Jennings worked in both Muncie
Yes.
as well as the city of Lexington, Kentucky, which has some of the similar challenges. Both of them have similar challenges to Athens, and some of them have different challenges and are doing interesting things in those communities. And so the ideas that she's going to bring from that, I think, are going to be real valuable for us.
Well, thank you. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Moving on, opportunity for citizens to speak about items not covered on the agenda. Good. Okay, announcements and other business. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do have one, and this is related to the new community authority in the Ridges. City staff did tour the other day the sewer line that is been installed here recently on the Ridges Tier 2 property, and if you follow it. It basically goes from Dairy Lane. You're running backwards, right? But from Dairy Lane up the hill to that Ridges Tier 2 property. It was such a substantial effort to get the sewer line in that there wouldn't be that much more effort to get a road to go through there. So we looked at with Ohio University folks. That may be a point from a transportation perspective that we could access that area, because right now access to that area is somewhat of a problem, and that's an area that's in the city. It's going to have city sewer. It's going to be prime for growth in an area that we've said we wanted to grow in, and so that it may be a step that we want to take going forward. So just wanted to let everybody know we did that. We hadn't thought about that before, and
Okay, great. Our next meeting is March 6th, 2024. Motion to adjourn.
I move.
I second.
Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.